Nancy, and myself. So welcome everyone to today's winter camp. My name is Clementine Bordeaux. I am here on behalf of Racing Magpie. If you don't know about Racing Magpie, you can visit our website. We're located here in Mini Luzaha Otuahe in Rapid City. We were founded in 2015 as a place to center the Lakota practice of being a good relative and everything that one does. Our work is focused on elevating and amplifying the ongoing work of community-based artists and culture bearers, specifically in the Northern Plains region. So as part of being a good relative, this program will reimagine the Lakota winter camp model of problem solving and community building in today's world by examining deeper cultural roots about the way Lakota people and the larger Oceti Šakowin communities do things, how we interact with the universe around us, and how we interact with each other. Of course, these events are open to the public, but we cater to and welcome in people of the Oceti Šakowin background, both as presenters and audience. We want to thank the Bush Foundation for their generous sponsorship of this program. And if you would like to figure out how to support us further, we have a donation page on our website, but also you can support our artists. So either that if you want to purchase artwork or hire our artists, that's another way that you can support the work that we do. So as Jessica and Nancy present, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat or directly message me if you're in the Zoom room with us, or I will be monitoring the Facebook Live comments. So you can drop a comment, drop a question, and I'll make sure that they get to Jessica and Nancy. So without, further ado, I would like to welcome Nancy and Jessica. They will be showcasing the work of their project, Sewing Intimacies, which is a project encompassing a group of Dakota and Lakota women who collectively embarked on a journey to create jingle dresses this past summer. So we started in summer 2021, and I think I was a part of it. So a lot of us are still working on our jingle dresses. But thinking about in the wake of COVID-19 and the ongoing violence from the settler state, right? We think about a place like South Dakota that's not always the most welcoming to Native people. We saw the jingle dress that has continued to serve as a catalyst towards healing and resistance for Native communities across Indian country. Though the dress originates with our Anishinaabe relatives, the power it garners to bring communities together to overcome trauma is really palpable. So in this presentation, Jessica and Nancy will discuss their experiences making the dress and the elements of healing and community building that are facilitated in the practice of crafting. And so I will turn it over to you all.
I'm going to share my screen real quick. So Hami Takuyepi, let's see, is it up? Can you see my screen? I think.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, now I have to press the button, right? That does the actual thing. Technology. Wow.
Looks great.
Okay. So Hami Takuyepi, how do I get this going? Ishkian wachian kapi ka chante washana pechi zapie. Jessica Fremlin amakia ka Dakota Wambly washte winte miye. Kumia makoche edwati taka oyata mitawa kihana sasituan wakbetuan awichak yapie. So I was just introducing myself, stumbling through my Dakota, but I just want to introduce myself. My name is Jessica Fremlin. My Dakota name is it's actually a Lakota name, so it was given to me by a Lakota grandpa, but Wambly Wash Sewing, and so I just wanted to introduce myself as part of like situating myself within this work. So I am Dakota on my mom's side. My mom's from Siston-Wauketon, and on my dad's side, we're Ashkenazi Jews from Russia, emigrating from Russia originally. So My mom is Jean LeBlanc. Her mom was Elvira LeBlanc, and then my maternal grandparents were great grandparents were Peter LeBlanc and Grace Wana. So I say this, like I said, to both situate myself within the work, and to think about kind of how I fit into the piece. I really started on this journey because of a lot of the things that I kind of saw, in particular, starting with like the No Dapple movement. So I started to become interested in the jingle dress as a form of intertribal activist resistance during this movement, because even though I wasn't able to actually attend what was going on in Standing Rock, I followed it pretty closely. And in October, after one of the particularly violent arrests of water protectors, jingle dress dancers were asked to come to Standing Rock to perform their dance on the front lines. And so what I was looking at and what I was really struck by was the visual and the sonic and effective experience of watching that moment, just for me, even as it's being mediated through social media platforms. So it was, when I was watching it, I was affected profoundly. I found it hopeful. I found it melancholic. I found it infuriating, like all at the same time, to think about all of these things that are going on, right? So because of the it's like there's, even though this is a really beautiful moment of healing, like there's this constant violence that's looming in the background. And even as we watch the dancers on the front lines, you can see, the police and military vehicles in the background, and this kind of juxtaposition just really calls attention to the violence that surrounds our bodies all of the time. So I wanted to think about what it was about dance, especially the jingle dress dance, that's able to kind of cut across tribal differences and express a very disruptive form of resistance, but also in a way that's very loving and calls on our ontological traditions. So when I started going down this path and looking at the dance, I realized that it was about a lot more than just the dance. It was the sounds, the things that we saw, the bodily movements, the crafting that goes into everybody's dresses, the emotion that's involved. And after I started thinking about some of these things and working on this project, I started dreaming a lot about jingle dress dancing. And it would be just a number of different things. Sometimes I would just hear the dancing in the background of my dreams. Sometimes I would be dancing. Sometimes other people would be dancing. So I started kind of talking it over with friends and family and decided that I actually did want to make a jingle dress. I thought that it would also help me to better understand some of the elements of resistance that are built in the relationship between the dress and the dancer. And eventually this spread to the idea of creating a sewing circle. So I hoped that working with other Dakota women would help me to understand not only the individual relationship between the dancer and the dress, but also about the relational qualities that are brought in within crafting, right? So how are we connecting? Why and how is crafting important to our identities as Dakota women? How does crafting build relationships and knowledge that sustains our sovereign ways of being and also resists settler colonialism at the same time? Sorry, I need a little coffee. So because of the pandemic, of course, when I started working on this project, when I originally started working on organizing the sewing circle, I very much imagined and hoped for it to be in person. But obviously, as we know, we've been in this pandemic for going on 2 years now. So that had to change. So I, talked it over with my advisor. We talked about doing an online sewing group, which definitely changed the dynamics, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And overall, I was a bit nervous about the idea of doing this project and wanted to make sure that it was done in a good way, right? So, I mean, with Racing Magpie being so much about being a good relative, this is one of the things that I was very much concerned about. I didn't want to do anything that would be problematic or, just again not be done in a good way. So I reached out to Nancy Bordeaux because I've known her for some time now. I actually met her when I was in undergrad at the University of Minnesota. I was taking some Dakota classes, and another woman in our class invited me to a Dakota women's not sewing circle. That's what we're doing now, singing circle. And so we were learning traditional songs, and this is what Nancy was teaching us. So I've known her since then, but it had been a while since I talked to her. But I just thought that she would be somebody that would be able to give me some guidance on that. So Nancy Bordeaux is Sichangu Lakota from Rosebud. She's the CEO and president of Tawachin Tonka, a nonprofit that provides cultural competency training, focusing on Indigenous women's experiences with historical trauma, domestic violence, and human trafficking. So when we spoke, Nancy told me that when I reached out to her, she actually told me that she had been working on a dress for her granddaughter at the moment anyway. So she offered to share her knowledge about dressmaking and how that's connected to healing. So after that, I asked her if she would be willing to be a facilitator then for our group, and the rest is history. So I'm going to actually hand this off to Nancy now so she can introduce herself and discuss a little bit about her role in the group. So Nancy, are you here? Yeah.
Yes, I am.
Awesome. I will stop sharing mine so you can share your PowerPoint if you want.
Okay. Can you see that? Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Mine is just kind of be looking different today, but thank you, Jessica, for the introduction. Ampetuashte le tachanguluta we mie no si changula kota hemocha rose but South Dakota mataha. Le ampetuki le taku iwong laka piki ha wia wachi piki ha jingle dress ha iwong laka iwong laka picha ha wokla tanka ha chaksta. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nancy Bordeaux, and my Lakota name is Her Red Road Woman. I'm a Sichangu Lakota from South Dakota, and I'm here with Jessica to just kind of like do some stories around the jingle dress that the project that she had started, and she talked a lot about her experience and her stories with it. So we do come from a little bit of a different perspective on it, and I would like to say that where I am coming from, with the jingle dress dance is part of our healing, as Lakota women, and rather Oceti Šakowin women, and it's about our history of genocide and colonization that resulted in the impact of psychological and emotional wounding across generations, and we still see those impacts within our own families and within our communities. But during that time, we had the history of genocide and colonization that was imposed upon us. There was no time to grieve, and this was over a 500-year history. We had the consequence of boarding schools, and in the boarding schools, the horrendous forms of abuse and torture, rape, isolation, and murder, and all of that happened, that's being uncovered today here in our time. And so we know how horrible this real history is of boarding school, and how it changed everything for us, as Lakota people or Oceti Šakowin people. We know at that time, children became captive in the boarding schools. They were stolen from their families and their tribes and sent to boarding school. That's where, the deeply rooted family dysfunction started, because of what the children had learned back then in the boarding schools. And also, we have, to the boarding school, we have deeply rooted grief learned responses, from the boarding school experience. And so this is what we're addressing today and everything that we do to heal from this. And so I would like to say, going back to the topic of how do we, heal, and jingle dress dancing is about healing. Part of that jingle dress dancing is, actually getting into the sewing piece, putting the dress together. That in self is a healing journey, because a lot of us, are still working through, our, history of trauma within our current life, or maybe we have never been taught. And so in this case, I have never made a jingle dress before. My granddaughter dances and her grandma makes all her jingle dresses. And so I started to sew this jingle dress, and I mean to cut out and do all of these things. And it was a whole journey in itself to even be able to cut the first piece of fabric, and this beautiful fabric. And I was like, oh my God, I have to do this right. And so I would look at it and I would measure it and I would cut it. And then I would start cutting it. And then my granddaughter would come and say, my grandma made my jingle dress in one day. And so I would say, okay. And then I would get back on it and start cutting and sewing. And then sometimes I got stuck on this dress, and I wouldn't know what to do. And so I would put it aside and then I would start cutting it again. And what was really strange about that was I got stuck on the neck piece, and the kind of sewed, the seam on the shoulders uneven, so the collar wasn't sitting right. And so I thought, oh no, I got to rip this whole thing apart or sew a whole new top or something. And I put it aside and I didn't know what to do. So I asked my grandmother to help me. And then I came back sometime later to the dress and I pulled it out and I started looking at it. And as I was looking at it, I seen something on how to fix it. And so I just kind of zipped it, ripped a few stitches and zipped it up, and it was perfect. And so everything that happened with this dress was really in my mind and what I thought I couldn't do. So I know that, when women make jingle dresses or sew any, get into any type of sewing project, it's about, learning about their own creativity and expanding and enhancing their creativity. But a lot of times, we have to ask our grandmothers, to come and help us, or our mothers to come and help us, or really grandmothers to come and help us, in this project, because it is healing for us. And so when we were speaking about, living a life of Oceti Šakowin women, and how we used to live a long time ago, we have grandmothers that set these really good examples, and they never talked about values. Who did, back in the day? They just lived them. But today we have to teach values, we have to learn and we have to teach values, to our families and to our communities. And so we even the things like the Lakota 7 sacred values, are really important for us. And the reason why they're important for us is because in this generation, when I talked about our historic trauma and how devastated we were, our families and communities are today. When we start learning about our values, we get healing through values, and it helps us to begin the healing journey to transcend, historical trauma. So we have, the healing values of Wochekia, which is praying, Wa'ohola, which is respect, Wilihejia, which is courage, and Wa'unshila, which is, caring and compassion. These are the major values that we need to heal together collectively. We have Wayu Oniha, we learn to honor ourselves and we learn to honor our others. We learn to honor our traditional way of life, our own Wolakota way of life. We learn to honor Unchimaka. We learn to honor the water and respect the water. we learn to stand up for the water crisis that is happening today, and the violation of indigenous rights, over water rights and over land. That's what Standing Rock was about. It was a total violation, of, our traditional lands. So while Wokie is, helping without expecting anything in return, we're helpers, whether, we're professional helpers, whether we're highly educated, whether we're just, from our communities, we're about helping one another and expecting nothing in return. However, mainstream America doesn't know this. It's all about capitalism and everything, that has to do with money, and that if you help somebody, they're going to expect, something in return. And so we're taught that if you help somebody, it's about the generosity of the heart, and don't expect anything in return, because we know that when we're helpers out there and helping save a life, or helping feed a family, that whatever it is that we're helping with, our spiritual life, the spiritual realm, our spiritual helpers will come and give us back much more than what we gave up, because we're given from the heart. And so that's, our signal, our communication through our thoughts and becoming active in it to the spirit world. And that's kind of like an electromagnet, signal that we send to them, and therefore they respond, because they're seeing, all this energy, which is really a lot of electromagnetism. So I think it's really important for people to know that we're not meant to live in a world of poverty. We're not meant to live in a world of want. We're not meant to live in this world suffering, body, mind, and spirit. We're meant to be spiritual people. We're meant to walk with that light, that energy of spiritual light within us. And so whatever it is we do, whether it's through Zoom or in person, we know that this type of living, this way of life of being Lakota is the most important way of life that, we should be living. And so this is kind of like a really good depiction of Mitakuye, the animal nation, Onchimakan, everything that's on her. We have our story of our, relationship with all these animals, and some of them, are really spiritual animal helpers. And so I want to bring that to us, this, the beauty of life, just kind of like the artwork, the pictures, and everything that we put together, is really something that comes out of our creativity. And it really is art when it becomes something, that comes out of our minds and our thoughts and how we put it together. So our first healing, when we're in our state of creativity, we are closer to our spiritual self. We are closer to that healing. And so this is one of the things that we're learning as we're learning how to use our hands and becoming industrious, is that when we're doing these actual projects, we're really close to the spirit world, and they really love, all the things that we're doing. So we do things for the importance of children, for our, indigenous nations, because we believe in intergenerational healing for children, because children are the wellspring of the future. They're the recipients of the tribal language, songs, histories, ceremonies, life skills, customs, beliefs, and practices as imparted by the elders. And children are the repository of tribal wisdom and heritage accrued over thousands of years. And it's just not a recent thing, but that healing has been, a way of life for thousands of years, that way of life. So children ensure the survival of tribal culture, through oral tradition, through our stories. And we have new stories today that they're learning in addition to the old stories. Children are born sacred and come from the constellation. So we have the amulet for the turtle, and also the Agleshka, the salamander. And so that's a Kea and the salamander. And then we have the Big Dipper, where they bring our spirits and souls from when a baby is born. So anytime a baby is born, you could feel the sacredness in that room. It's beautiful. And I know this because I'm a doula. I've been there when many babies were birthed. an honor to do that work. So through all of this, we create heart and brain coherence. And these are the values, these are more of the values that I talked about. So anytime you practice your value and put your hand on your heart, then these values, you're bringing them to life, and your body is also getting that healing. Very important, because that's synchronizing the heart and brain. In Lakota, we have a word called Nasula, and Nasula means planting seeds. Nasula means seeds. And so we plant seeds for healing. And all the learning, all the new things we're doing, all the things that we do with our hands, we're planting seeds, and it's changing our body chemistry for healing for that day. But this is also a daily way of life for us. And that daily way of life is really activating, our inner healing. So we're activating the dopamine, the oxytocin, the serotonin, and endorphins. And these are really healing chemicals that when they're activated, they reach every part of your body and activate, that healing in the cell. And our, what they call genes have been so wounded for generations, and that we have, what they call trauma genes. And so that's why we see what we see within our communities and our families having a psychological, mentally having a really difficult time, and see the addictions and all of that stuff. And so in order for us to change that for ourselves, to be helpers to others, we have to really be cognizant of what's happening in our body when we're doing healing things. Where all of these things will turn on the healing genes, for our bodies and our minds, our brains mostly. And so that, these two have that communication, and we're able to move on and know that, every day that, we're participating in something like as simple as walking or running or dancing or singing. Those are really important. And this is, really something to think about for the traditional healing plants like sage, cedar, and sweetgrass. And the reason why it's important to think about, how do we heal from these? There is a spiritual connection and intrapsychic connection anytime that you light up the sage. Anywhere that you may have trauma, PTSD, or even a physical pain in your body, just the act of lighting up that sage goes to those places and heals. That's why we use, and it purifies our body, mind, and spirit, and the room that we're in. That's why we use a sage. So it's very important to know at the deepest level of what this healing plants are doing for you. So all the rest of this stuff, ceremonies, meditation, as I said, creativity brings you close to your spirit self and close to, the spiritual world. Writing is important, even cleaning and gardening, visiting, laughter and humor. And so, we may have stresses, and it will happen, but we have the resiliency now that we know about our own healing, and that these are things that we can do naturally every day. They're doable. That, we start our own healing processes because we've awakened our own healing processes through this way, by the knowledge of how we heal. So traditional ways of life are really important. Like in the physical area, we go out and we gather medicines. We do daily purification. Even we can't go into the purification lodge, praying with water, drinking water, because water is sacred. Water is medicine. Water is life. Then we know that we're healing. We pray with meals. We pray making ties. We do food offerings. We keep our hands busy, and it keeps our minds busy, where we create positive energy doing all these things. And we make relatives when we go out and we visit or meet new people. We attract the right people to ourselves. We do our ceremonies. We activate our heart, and our heart, is really what is the central point of our healing. We can have bad things in our heart. We can have good things in our heart. Therefore, the story of the bear and the wolf having, that fight in your heart. But when you know how to heal, it's not so much of a polarization of, going up and down, in your mind or in your brain. It's about balancing and harmonizing through, your heart activities. It's about positive values, making sure, always remembering your values are what are going to lead you. Um, it's about healthy emotions, visiting, being present, all of that stuff. And to know about being present is to know that we learn from our past. We're not in our future yet, but we're safe right here. And it's the most powerful time for us to be a human being with a spirit. Positive thinking, energy awareness. We grow our energy with all of this positivity. Once we start learning how to grow our energy will never become negative and shrink around us. So that's energy awareness. We learn traditional life ways. Our dreams are healing, our visions are healing, our nightmares are healing. It's telling us something. The empowering values. And so this is a tree that I had made, and I just want to say that I showed you a picture of a brain. The brain grows, it actually does literally, and we grow trees in our brain when we use our values. And this is a study that has been done. And we have values that are the giving principles of law. And so there, our laws as, Oceti Šakowin people. And we've had experienced a deep moral injury because of, our history of trauma. But then that affirms our morality and our self-identity now when we start practicing our values. And so up here in the tree trunks are all the activities that we do. We use our body, our voices to get out there and activate those values through visiting, singing, being a lifelong learner, having humor. And so what I want to say is we grow a new tree in our brain every time, every day that we practice, these things, and we accomplish something, and it moves our minds and our hearts, and it helps us to start transcending our trauma. These trees in our brain are called dendrites. So we actually really do grow a new tree. Water is healing. It's a creator's way of communicating with us, praying, and we're also mostly made of water. Our brains, our lungs, everything. And so when we pray with water and we drink that water, it does wash our body. And it also, cleanses and purifies us because we did pray with that water. Really important. Water has memory. We know that. And so that's why we use this water in ceremony, and it becomes medicine. But one thing we didn't know until recently in the past decade is that when we pray as with water as, just an individual person, we are so much more than we know. That water becomes, purified by your prayer, by saying affirmations with it. So I was like, pray with water, say affirmations, put it by your bed if it's during the day. Pray with your water and put it down if you're busy, and drink it like 15 minutes later. It's really helpful and it's healing for the body. So we heal from rebirth in a purification lodge. And this is the most powerful way to be as Indigenous women. Sometimes we can't get over a lot of things, so we go, and it's also from our job, and we had that historic trauma in our lives. Even we can't get over a challenge that we have. And so when we go into Inipi, we pray about it. We pray about this challenge, and then we leave it there because we are cleansed, we are purified, and our minds are refreshed and renewed. Our minds, are what control our brains. Our minds are what is the closest to Creator. And we have to always remember that our minds, our spirits are separate from our brain, from this physical body. Our minds were given to us as a gift from Creator. It's our nahi, our spirit. So this is our way of, being as Oceti Šakowin women, using our medicines, singing with the drum, even just singing or dancing. It's really a beautiful way of life. When we talk about dancing, you could see the energy coming off, these hoop dancers, and everybody that's sitting in the crowd is getting healing from this energy that they're putting out. You could see the calmness and kind of like look around and look at the faces, and they're just sitting there looking all that time that they're performing, because something is happening. The energy crosses over. these are jingle dress dancers, and these are healing dancers. And so very important to know actually that everything that we do is for a purpose. We make our ceremonial dresses. We make, the jingle dress down. We make everything for healing. We make our pipe bags and everything like that. So we're actually a really creative people. And so thank you for your participation.
Thanks, Nancy. It's always so good to hear your words. I think what's really beautiful about all of that is, I feel like what you just shared with us is like the condensed version of what you shared with us over that extended period of time, because our group lasted from like the summer until just, well, we tried to go a little bit into the winter and we kind of like fell off a little bit, but it lasted for kind of a while, and we have plans to pick up again at some point, but so we were able to get all of that information and healing from you through hearing your words. And, I think one of the things that both me and Clem actually had talked about was like the nature walks that you had talked about, was just sometimes going outside and, like feeling the sun on your face and just sitting outside in nature and, having a glass of water or something, and how that can really center you and bring you back to your healing. So but yeah, we definitely really benefited tremendously from Nancy's knowledge throughout our group. It was really wonderful to learn from you. So, I forgot to have this up the whole time. But there she is in all her glory. And then, so this is like a picture of one of our group days. So Nancy using humor, laughing on the side. And then that's me and my mom. And then one of the other participants, Emmy. So yeah, and Nancy had mentioned as well about in her story about going to her grandmother and asking for help and everything. And that was definitely something I had to do as well. I had not sewn in years. Like I think I had helped my mom make a ribbon skirt. And that was probably several years ago. And then I had made one other dress even longer ago than that. So it had really been a long time. And I had a lot of the same kind of apprehensions about like cutting and if I'm going to make this huge mistake, which was actually something that ran through our whole group as well, which I'll talk actually a little bit more about later. But so I did end up calling my mom, like, help me. So she came and did that. But so our group actually started with about 13 women, and then it kind of ended with about 8-ish that were coming consistently. But we had people from all over the place, which was what was really beautiful about the online dynamic, so there's definitely some things that we lost by not being able to be in person, but the fact that we were able to bring together people from across the US, and we even had a woman that was in Germany. So there was a lot of great things that I think came from that. So we met about 1 to 2 times a week on Zoom to sew together. Sometimes there were formalities where, Nancy would bring in some specific knowledge or present a particular technique. She would send us videos sometimes about, how to sew like the collar, how to put on a zipper, those kinds of things. But mostly a lot, like our group kind of, especially towards the end, became a lot more casual, and it was just pretty informal. We would just kind of laugh and have casual conversations about what's going on in each other's lives while we were sewing. So it really just became this kind of communal space. But we were able to, originally we ordered all of our materials from Teton Trade Cloth, which was great. they were able to, give us a little bit of a discount, which is always welcome. And, but what was wonderful about that was that we were also able to support Native artists with their materials. So everybody that joined the group was able to choose what kind of material they wanted and what kind of cones they wanted. And we were able to send it out. And I also, at the very beginning, was able to send everybody, a sage bundle and like a welcome kind of card and everything. And the idea behind that was also to make sure that everybody had sage, right? I mean, I think that we all assume that we do, but I think one of our participants had actually said that she had just run out, so it was perfect. But since it is a healing dress, and since sage is one of our medicines, I thought it was important that we all have access to this so that we can all purify ourselves before we engage with that. So the work inside our group and the framework that I was using to understand the research is grounded in native feminism. So which essentially just means that I'm constantly thinking about settler colonialism as a project that's steeped in heteropatriarchal interests. So Nancy's work with women to heal trauma, to heal the trauma that so directly impacts all of us, has been invaluable to the group. And I think, as you can imagine, throughout the project, we kept coming back to this concept of healing, right? So it's a healing dress, and like healing was constantly a part of the discussion. And what I thought was interesting about that is, in some circles, there's this kind of expectation that, I think in particular, an example I can think about is like, with the Truth and Reconciliation, the TRC committees. But so with those, right, in Canada, the expectation is that, oh, we do this thing and then now you're healed and everything's fine, right? But that's just not how it works, right? We're constantly healing. And that also means that our trauma is also kind of constantly looming in the background, because this is the thing that we have to heal from, right? So I was thinking about that, and thinking about how colonial violence is really constant, right? We experience this all the time. It's an everyday thing. So there's constantly more for us to heal from in a lot of ways. But I think, as Nancy was saying, all of the ways that she presented for us, laughter, praying, crafting, are ways that we combat that in the everyday. So a large theoretical piece of my research had to do with the notion of haunting. Let me see if this is the last one. There's this book called Ghostly Matters, written by Avery Gordon. And in that book, they introduced the notion of haunting as producing this impetus of something to be done. Something has to be done. So the ghosts of trauma, of pain, and even of joy might revisit us to induce some kind of movement, some like propel us in some kind of direction. And I actually, I think that what's important about that is that it's not always trauma too, right? Like, as much as, our ancestors dealt with trauma, they also were funny people. They laughed a lot. And I thought about that. And I think with laughter as a form of medicine, I thought about this a lot. And I had recently learned stories about an ancestor of mine whose name was Ihawi. And I thought that was just great, because it's laughter woman, or woman who laughs. And so whenever I was thinking about, in particular, when we would have these group sessions and we would all be just having these like really hearty laughs, it also invoked that kind of ancestral joy for me, as much as, we're thinking about this healing thing. So, and then I think also kind of keeping with this idea about healing and trauma, right? So the creation story even behind the jingle dress is something that is, you know, also linked to trauma. So as we know, the dress has Anishinaabe origins. Brenda Child, who's a professor of American Indian Studies at the University of Minnesota, has drawn some explicit links between this current pandemic that we're in and to the one that was at the center of the jingle dress story. So as the story goes, right, this pandemic, this Spanish flu was like sweeping across Indian country, and people were getting sick. And so the dress came to a grandfather in the dream, and makes it to help induce healing for his sick granddaughter. So and when she danced, it was the sounds, it was the medicine and the love that was poured into the dress that helped to heal her as well. So eventually the dress and its healing properties spread across Indian country to help other communities heal. And I think, you know, with the Dakota being so close in proximity to the Anishinaabe, it came to us pretty early as well. And I have a couple pictures here. And these are dresses that were at the Minnesota Historical Society for an exhibit that they did, where it was like looking back at the jingle dress over the past 100 years. And so there's two dresses here. There's a Dakota jingle dress that's listed as being created in 1905. And I'm not really sure if that's actually maybe an error in the provenance, because my understanding is that the jingle dress was created around like 1917, 1918-ish. So I don't know what that's about necessarily, but also I think it's just beautiful to look at these dresses and to kind of sit with them and think about what kind of ghosts around them. And again, ghost doesn't have to have a negative connotation, right? I think it's interesting to just sit with them and think about the history and the energy that's country, but it's definitely been engaged as a symbol grounded resistance, as we saw in Standing Rock, and as a means to heal from the haunting presence that is colonial trauma. So the goal of this particular project was never to teach non-natives how to make a jingle dress or to share knowledge necessarily that isn't ours to share, but I've been interested in thinking about the artistry of the dress and its ability to traverse Native borders to bring about some forms of collective healing, and to tell stories and to imagine possibilities for decolonial futures, even that are happening simultaneously. And I think that was what was so beautiful about going back here to the first slide, right? So it's like this kind of simultaneous future that's happening, where at the same time that we see colonial violence, we're also seeing the possibility of something different being created in real time, which I think is really beautiful. As I mentioned, Native feminism is generally invested in analyzing the kind of interminglings between settler colonialism and heteropatriarchy. And I've been thinking about, and Native feminism overall implements, not Native feminism, settler colonialism implements these particular kinds of gender norms and targets Native women and Two-Spirit people, especially for violence, right? Within our communities, those are the ones that are the most heavily targeted. So my work is concerned with this too, right? So especially since my work is interested in the jingle dress as an activist expression, but our communities, of course, are not monoliths. So since I am Dakota, I thought it was best to think through a Dakota worldview to understand how we connect to each other through crafting practices, right? So Native feminism, I'm trying to not think about it as this kind of broad stroke thing, but to think about it as having different kind of interactions of where, depending on where it comes from, right? A Native feminism from a Dakota perspective is probably going to be vastly different from a Native feminism from a Dene perspective or from a Paiute perspective, right? So thinking about that, I wanted to ground my work within the writings and the thoughts of Dakota women, Dakota or Lakota women. So I drew on the work of Ella Cara Deloria, who was a famous anthropologist, also a Dakota woman, as well as Itkala Shah, who is a Hankdawa, and she's a writer and an activist. So both of those women provide really powerful narratives for understanding the importance of crafting to our worlds as Oceti Šakowin women. So there's two particular books I was thinking about. The first is Water Lily, which I'm not sure if any of you all have read, but it's one of my favorites thus far. I feel like I keep coming back to it. So it's a novel, but it is very much based on Ella Deloria's real life experiences growing up on the plains. And in this story and echoed throughout the short stories Itkala Shah shares in her work, we see the importance of crafting and aesthetic practices to making and building relations both within our tribes and then across tribal communities. And this happens in a number of different ways. So for Water Lily, we see crafting showing up everywhere in that book. Every single ceremony, every single important moment is marked with some form of crafting, right? So for example, there's a time when they, I think, I'm trying to think, there's so many examples. There's a time, for example, when they meet with the Omaha, and the Omaha come to share their grass dance, right? And there's like particular protocols about how to present yourself, right? And so as the hosts, right, they say that you're not meant to like heavily ornament yourself and all of that stuff because you don't want to outshine your guests, right? And then the Omaha come and they share the grass dance and they're dressed in their finest and all of these things. And it's this communication that comes through crafting. It's the relational aspects that are built through the crafting and through the aesthetic practices of dancing and singing and all of these things combined. So Zinkala Shah, and the thing is that there's a ton of lessons that come through with crafting, whether it's patience, confidence, and humility, the importance of family, etc. For example, Zitkala Shah in her book has an anecdote about learning how to make designs that were simple so that she could complete them, rather than always aiming for the super intricate designs, which is actually something that I had to learn in this group. I had this huge idea for my dress that I wanted to create all these different lines and all this stuff. And, a couple of people were like, well, that looks a little bit tough. And of course I didn't finish my dress, probably in part because I made it more difficult for myself than I needed to. But that's the story of my life. So I'm fine with that. But so the idea also that comes through in that story with Zitkala Shah is that our designs, and this is also something that was reiterated, I think, by Nancy, that crafting is creation, that crafting really brings us closer to the creator, and to our spirituality, right? And so the designs that we learn, the designs that come to us in our heads that we work on with our dresses or with our beadwork or whatever it might be, are gifts from the creator. So you'll hear some people in the group's experience of having to let the dresses design come to them over time, right? So my mom talks about that as well, and to let the timing of the dress itself unfold because it has a life force and it has an agency all of its own, right? And I think that this is also something that came up for me, where it was this kind of like, I need to hurry up and get this done, right? And what I really needed to learn in that moment was to slow down and to have a little bit of patience, right? And I think one of the other things that comes up a lot is the concept of perfectionism that came up a lot for all of us. But perfectionism is very much a colonial endeavor, right? So our communities understood that imperfection is everywhere, that to be human is to make mistakes. And actually, our non-human relatives are probably more perfect than we are, right? They've been here longer than we have, which is why we see, careful practices messages of correction that are encoded into our ways of life, such as, for example, this happens a lot in water lily, right? Scolding an older sibling for letting a younger sibling do something that they know is bad because the younger sibling is too young to know, but the older sibling is supposed to be looking out for them, right? You know, and I remember one session in particular as well, where I also had asked Nancy a little bit about this comfort with imperfection. And she talked about like the fact that we're actually only really perfect when we're in the spirit world. So mistakes are okay and mistakes are expected. And oftentimes they're meant to be there for a particular reason, right? So in beadwork, we might see somebody leave a mismatched bead because it must have meant to be there in the first place. And I also have a note here about Jenny Tonpa Hope, which I didn't put a picture, but she was a Kiowa scholar that wrote this book called Crafting an Indigenous Nation, where she talks a lot about the crafting practices particular to the Kiowa, and also about the ways that assimilation was targeting a lot of those crafting practices. And we see that happening in boarding schools, which is actually one of the things that's on the next leg of my upcoming research, hopefully. How am I doing on time? I'm just going.
Yeah, I think we got started a little late, so I think you still have a couple minutes.
Okay, I'm almost done too. I think I
Okay.
have like 2 slides. Okay, so this is all of us again. So as much as settler colonialism is invested in heteropatriarchy, and it's also invested in the reorganization of space in an effort to kind of invisibilize Indian people, right, to take our land, etc. But it's also used as a means of disrupting our relational practices between not just each other, but also between our more than human relatives, such as the land, the water, our animal relatives, of which I have one here right now. So we have a number of different examples of these different interruptions. So, you know, the Dakota War of 1862 certainly disrupted a lot of our space. We have the Dawes Act, the relocation program, termination, all of these things. They interrupted our relations and made it difficult for us to develop relationships and essentially prompted us to find new ways to get together to make, you know, to make these kind of relations, which I think is actually kind of something that we're repeating with this group, right? So like there is an obstacle because of this pandemic, but we're finding a way around it, which seems to be a thing that our resilience helps us to do. So in recent years, right, because of the pandemic, we had to, you know, experience another layer of this disruption. So a lot of groups other than mine also moved online, right? So social media has also become a greater part of our everyday lives. It's something that brings us together and helps us to overcome the physical distance between us. But of course, social media also has been it's a powerful tool, as much as it's a powerful tool of organizing that we've seen a lot in places like Standing Rock, for example, or Idle No More, etc. It also does present certain types of surveillance dangers, which is something that Leanne Simpson talks about in As We Have Always Done. And she talks about just the way that that we shouldn't kind of valorize social media and stuff, because there are certainly dangers that come up against it. And I think in particular, one of those could be the sharing of information to people we don't want to share it with, right? So in order to protect against that, I had created a blog space as well for us, where I recorded our sessions and would post them there, but I made them password protected so that it was just the participants that had access to it, just in case I didn't want just, you know, a random Joe Schmo to come up and like learn how to make a jingle dress. So I was trying to do as much as I could to protect our knowledge as well. So there's a couple other folks, Marissa Duarte and Kutcha Risling Baldy. Both of them have new articles in this book. It's called Indigenous People Rise Up, the Global Ascendancy of Social Media Activism. And in those, they talk about the possibilities and the dangers of virtual space, thinking about, for example, Marissa Duarte talks in particular about the way that cyber stalking actually is one of the precursors to violence against Native women, right? This is something that in a lot of ways, social media has made it easier for people to track down women and commit violence against them. So that's definitely something that I think deserves a bit of attention. But she also explains how our relational responsibilities as kin can be facilitated through virtual networks. And Risling Baldy expands on this by talking about how the online presence of Native women helps to claim new spaces of radical relationality by building across space and asserting our existence, right? So in particular, like right now we're live streaming, right? And in a lot of you know, I guess the formal presence in archives, et cetera, of Native women, we are archived, right, as these like historical monolithic beings. But through social media in different spaces, like we can call attention, you know, like the use of hashtags and how those have called attention to matters that people probably wouldn't have cared about before. But the very fact of live stream also makes us like real people in the present right now, talking about things that are going on. But yeah, so overall, these kinds of groups are meant to build connections at like similar to how they did in Water Lily or in the Zit Kala Shah's American Indian Stories, right? So through crafting, we're trying to, you know, build our relational capacities and be good relatives. But there, of course, is difficulty with there being distance. It does take longer to build relationships. I definitely was drawing on some connections that I already had, you know, for example, having Clementine be a part of the group, you know, but I also think that that's a part of our relational responsibilities as Lakota women, is that we work with each other, right? And then you know, coordinating schedules, tech problems, etc. You know, I think overcoming you know, the difficulty of not having somebody like hands-on to help you was definitely something that all of us experienced as well. But overall, I've kind of found that the digital, as long as we ground it in our traditions, does provide some openings from new forms of long distance relationalities to emerge. So I am going to share some pictures of folks' dresses that they made. So just kind of going through them here. Let me see if I can find these. I have everybody's statements, I thought. Well, a couple people sent in statements to share. These two I am missing because they were present at the last one. But so on the left, we have a dress made by Oceti Šakowin, Lakota and Tohono O'odham territory. I don't believe they are there now, but they were in the past. And then on the right is a dress made by Oglala Lakota woman on Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute lands, but I think not there either anymore. And then there was this one by Sonic D, Crazy Bull, Shoshone, Paiute, and Sichango Lakota from Rosebud. And she actually wrote out a statement to share with folks. She explained that she was interested in seeing how the work would progress. And in one of the earliest meetings of the group and in other meetings afterward, Nancy talked about prayer and about the mindset to be in when sewing and when making something for someone else. She says, this is something I've always thought of when I'm in a creative space working on items for myself or others. She was sewing since she was a little girl. My grandma would let me sit on her lap and sew while she controlled the speed of the sewing machine. And I started seriously sewing when I was pregnant with my oldest child, who's now 20 years old. I mainly sew quilts and items from home, such as pillows, wall hangings, zipper pouches, etc. I really loved being able to work on the project with others. Video chat allowed me to stay in closer contact with my family and friends as people are overseas for the past 8 years. I know that craft and sewing groups got together a lot during the pandemic, so I'm glad this is the medium. I love sewing with other people. Is a great way for us to visit and help each other as we worked on our dresses. As a Lakota woman, sewing is important. Sewing is important because it can be so meaningful. I've made quilts for new babies, for graduations, and for funerals. Sewing has deepened friendships and allowed me to participate in events while not living close to home. I also grew up in a family with my mom and grandma always sewing or being creative. I recall them saying that Lakota women, Indian women, are industrious people. I often think about that when someone says they don't have anything to do, because I always have something to do. And I really love this statement because of several things. I think in particular, the fact of staying in closer contact. Thessaloniki was actually living in Stuttgart, Germany at the time. And so I think that this group was really awesome to be able to have her be a part of this group and to develop deeper relationships. And I think also the fact that she mentions sewing items for these different important markers of life is also something that we see echoed in these other stories that I shared earlier. And then there is this other one here by Wonshala, jealous of him. So she just explains that she enjoyed the group during the times that she could attend, that hearing the stories, experiences, and new beginnings of creative work was enjoyable. That sewing and beading is something that really helps mentally, that anything artsy or crafty helps the mind to find some peace. It's a time to reflect and pray, as well as keep good thoughts in mind while creating something for someone else. And then I'll move on so we can go a little bit quicker. And I actually didn't have statements for these ones either, because they were also at the last one. But so Natasha Thompson is actually my sister. She sits in Wahpeton, Dakota, also living here on Kumeyaay Makoche. And then Clementine Bordeaux, who we know whose dress is on the right, actually. So yeah, everybody seemed to really enjoy this. This is also my mom's dress that she made. And my mom had some, my mom definitely did that bit where she had to take a step back from it as well. Like we talked about how she essentially like dreamed the design for her dress. But she shared a little bit of a statement as well, that when she was younger, she was a part of a sewing circle that would get together to sew different things like ribbon shirts and other items to support the Native community and for giveaways at powwows and things like that. And that there was some difficulties with it being online versus in person. It felt a little bit less, a little bit more reserved, there was no way that we could share food together and stories in the same way, which I think is a really important difference for us to think about, and to think about different ways to kind of overcome that. But she did say that for her, that it was great to see people from all over the world and how we could come together, express our experiences through the sewing project. But I think that what was also really beautiful about this was to see some of the intergenerational exchanges that happened here. I think several people made dresses for, nieces, for, granddaughters. I made my dress originally thinking that it was going to be for me. Actually, there's my dress. And I didn't finish it, of course, because like I said, my design, I was a little bit ambitious. But I made my dress originally thinking it was going to be for me. And while I was creating it, it just kind of came to me that it was probably going to be for my niece. And I think I might have to wait for her for a little bit, but it felt like it was something that was meant to be given away. So, but yeah, that's overall everything that I have to say. And again, a thank you to Nancy and to Racing Magpie for having us come here. I really appreciate the opportunity to share our work, and to Clementine also for being a part of the group. It was really great. And we are planning to pick it up again at some point, probably in the spring, just before powwow season, So that's all I have. Wopira tanka.
Cool. Thank you all so much. I've been here monitoring the chat, but I feel like I'm the only one making comments right now. But if there are any questions from our Zoom audience or anyone that's in the live stream, please drop your questions in the chat. We can hang out for a couple more minutes. I know we just went over an hour, but I thought it was such a good presentation from both of you, Nancy and Jessica. I really appreciate you sharing your experience, and Nancy sharing your knowledge. I always feel so inspired after hearing you, Nancy. I'm like, I'm gonna go sew everything right now.
I feel the same. I'm always like, I'm gonna go pray with some water.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry for going over too. I didn't realize I was gonna talk so much.
No, I think it's good. I think the conversations you both shared are really important about both about crafting and our values. I think, Nancy, when you talked about that we have to teach values now, right? That we're trying to learn how to get back to embedding that in our everyday. That was a really important conversation.
I agree.
Cool. Well, we're at time, and I think you all were very thorough. So if there's no other comments or questions, I think we can come to a close.
Okay. Wupira tanka everybody and dokshta kewachian kekte.
Thank you all so much.
Ihon dokshta.
Doksha.
Doksha.